The great Minnesota tax scam. Already ripples of this happening across the country, and the president is talking about it. Trump moves to end temporary protected status for Somalis. Well, why is he doing this? Minnesota under Governor Walz, says President Trump, is a hub of fraudulent money laundering activity. I am, as President of the United States, hereby terminating, effective immediately, the temporary protected status for Somalis in Minnesota. Somali gangs are terrorizing the people of a great state, and billions of dollars are missing. Send them back to where they came from. It's over, President DJD. So there's a lot going on there. Of course, Tim Walz, who, I really hoped that I'd never have to talk about again after this, previous campaign. He's so irritating and annoying. And, it was nice to see him kind of just drift off into the never world. I mean, Kamala is already gone in that range. You'd think Walz would be even farther, but unfortunately, he's still running a state. So occasionally we have to discuss him. He says, it's not surprising that the president has chosen to broadly target an entire community. This is what he does to change the subject. I mean, he didn't say it that intelligently, but I'm just reading what he says in his voice. Okay, so what does this all come from? There's a lot. Some of this has been known, but a lot of it has been uncovered by Chris Rufo. Chris Rufo, of course, a reporter. He writes for the City Journal, has a big piece on this, along with Ryan Thorpe. I will remind you, by the way, that Chris Rufo has the newest show on Blaze TV. You should check this out. It's called Rufo and Lomez. It's available now as part of your Blaze TV subscription. I believe it's available, on YouTube and other places as well. So check it out, Rufo and Lomez. And Chris Rufo is one of the, big conservative leaning reporters who unearths this stuff all the time. He's, taught us many, many things over the past few years that we've been talking about constantly. So him having a show on Blaze TV, great. And his reporting here, really, really impactful. Let me give you some of it. This is about Minnesota, all the problems going on there. What caused Trump to want to move in this direction? Here we go. If you were to design a welfare program to facilitate fraud, it would probably look a lot like Minnesota's Medicaid Housing Stabilization Services Program. HSS program, first of its kind in the country, launched with a noble goal, as they always are, to help seniors, addicts, the disabled, and the mentally ill secure housing. It was designed with low barriers to entry, and minimal requirements for reimbursement, Nonetheless, before the program went live in 2020, officials pegged its annual estimated price tag at $2.6 million. Now, how do these stories go? If I were to tell you a program is supposed to cost $2.6 million, what would be your first thought about what the program will cost? Your thought is at least directionally accurate. Whether you actually had the scope of what I'm about to tell you might be doubtful, because it's hard to predict this bad of a situation. Costs quickly spiraled out of control. In 2021, the program paid out more than $21 million. That's 10 times what it was supposed to be valued. In the following years, annual costs shot up to $42 million. That's 20 times. Then $74 million, 35 times the value. Then $104 million. Now we're up over 40 times the value. During the first 6 months of 2025, payouts totaled $61 million. You put that out on pace, you're going to be breaking the record yet again. It's supposed to cost $2 million. This year probably costs $130 million. So that's like normal government waste, right? It's just all these programs always cost way more than they say they're going to. It's a little bit more than that in this particular case. On August 1st, Minnesota's Department of Human Services moved to scrap the HSS program, noting the payment to 77 housing stabilization providers have been terminated this year due to credible allegations of fraud. Joe Thompson, the then acting attorney for the District of Minnesota, went even further, stated the vast majority of the HSS program was fraudulent. On September 18th, Thompson announced criminal indictments for HSS fraud against 6 members of Minnesota's Somali community. Thompson made it clear that it's just the first round of charges for the fraud. So what's going on here? A lot of different things. But the main focus of this is this particular community became expert at defrauding the government of Minnesota. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute, of course they defrauded the government of Minnesota. It's led by the dumbest man on the planet. And that is true. That's a good part of the story, not included in the report, however, at any point. And that might be because they really believe Eric Swalwell is the dumbest person in our society. So that's a very defensible point here. They're also like reporters and actually reporting facts, not just saying things like I do. Thompson said many firms enrolled in the program operated out of dilapidated storefronts and rundown office buildings. Perpetrators often targeted people recently released from rehab, signing them up for Medicaid services they had no intention of providing. Thompson noted many owners of companies engaged in HSS fraud had other companies through which they build other Medicaid programs. This is a web, such as the EIDBI Autism Program, the Adult Rehabilitative Mental Health Services Program, the Integrated Community Support Program, the Community Access for Disability Inclusion, PCA services, other Medicaid waivered services. This is one of the problems with our approach to talking about certain types of health problems. Many of them are real, right? They're real problems. Like autism is a real thing. Mental health concerns are a real thing. The problem, which makes it difficult for a government to be involved in those problems, is that they're very difficult to define. Autism, for example, is a collection of different symptoms, right? That's how they diagnose this. It's not like a blood test, right? You don't get a blood test and say, oh, you have autism. That's not the way it works. Famously, we talk about a spectrum when it comes to autism these days. And so some people are really, very much on the fringes of that spectrum. Some people are very much like in the middle of it, right? You have people who are really suffering, obviously noticeable circumstances. Some people not really, like you talk to them and they seem without any concern at all. That doesn't mean they don't have it. That doesn't mean that those things aren't real, but it's very difficult for the government to define whether they're real or not. And when someone says they have autism and they're affected on the spectrum, it's very difficult to prove that to be incorrect, right? So what the Somali community here has decided, and along with this housing scandal, is to a lot of people who fit into those programs can be slid in there. Very difficult to prove that they're not on that particular spectrum, and then therefore money can flow to these companies. And again, they're setting up arrangements where money comes in for the government to pay for the services, and then these people also own the companies that are charging the initial group for those services. So they're kind of benefiting on both sides of this. September 18th, the same day the HSS fraud charges were announced, U.S. Attorney's Office reported that a man named Abdoulaye Noor Jassau, almost picked that name for my son. What a coincidence. Had become the 56th defendant to plead guilty in the $250 million Feeding Our Future fraud scheme. What is feeding our future? Feeding our future? Do you want the future to be hungry? No, you want to feed the future. That's why we have programs called Feeding Our Future. I'm sure it worked really well, right? Founded in 2016, Feeding Our Future was a small Minnesota nonprofit that sponsored daycares and after-school programs to enroll in the federal child nutrition program. Are you against nutrition, you bastard? The organizations that Feeding Our Future sponsored were primarily owned and operated by, you're going to be surprised to hear, members of Minnesota's Somali community. In 2019, Feeding Our Future received $3.4 million in federal funding dispersed by the state in the months after the COVID-19 pandemic began. However, the nonprofit rapidly increased its number of sponsored sites using fake meal counts, doctored attendance records, and fabricated invoices. The perpetrators of the fraud ring claim to be serving thousands of meals a day, 7 days a week, to underprivileged children. Well, that's great, right? Underprivileged children, thousands of them a day. Thank God we're helping all those people. I've heard I was just listening to Mom Donnie say this, 100,000 children are homeless in New York City. We have to make sure they're fed, right? We won't question that number right now. In 2021, Feeding Our Future received nearly $200 million in funding. Remember when it started at $3 million? Remember that? In reality, the money was being used to fund lavish lifestyles, purchase luxury vehicles, and buy real estate in the United States, Turkey, and Kenya. Several individuals involved in Feeding Our Future, this scheme, they donated to or publicly appeared with, guess who? Ilhan Omar, a stunning development. She's a Somali-born congresswoman and star of multiple music videos. That's right. Actually, I think it's only one, but Maroon 5. If you ever want to watch Ilhan Omar in her prime, watch her in the Maroon 5 video. Omar's deputy district director, Ali Issei, advocated on behalf of Feeding Our Future. Omar Fateh, you remember him, he was a former state senator who recently ran and just barely lost for the Minneapolis mayor, lobbied Timmy Walz in support of the program, and one of the accused, Abdi Nur Salah, served as a senior aide to Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry. He's the one that actually beat Fateh in that election, in a very close election. Just days later, on September 24th, U.S. Attorney Joseph Thompson announced his office's first indictment in yet another fraud case. Yeah, this is a web we're talking about. This time, scheme involved federally funded autism services for children. Now, this is how the scheme operated. The accused is a woman named Asha Farhan Hassan, which again was almost Ainsley's name, a member of Minnesota's Somali community, who has also been charged in the Feeding Our Future scam. She's alleged to have played a role in a $14 million fraud scheme perpetrated against Minnesota's early intensive developmental and behavioral intervention program. This is a tough one here because, they're getting involved in a real problem and trying to milk it for every dollar possible. This is how you defraud the government, right? They have been doing it for a long time, allegedly. Hassan and her co-conspirators approached parents in the Somali community and recruited their children into autism therapy services. It didn't matter, prosecutors suggested. If a child did not have an autism diagnosis, Hassan would facilitate a fraudulent one. Now, this is an unfortunate part of all of this is that a lot of times real resources can come to you if your child is affected with something like autism. They can come in a program that is really, really helpful and beneficial to your kid. But not being on the spectrum doesn't get you access to that. So, there are plenty of people who are like, well, look, I don't know that my kid is, what I've seen with some kids with autism who are really suffering. But, these benefits would help them, and I want to help my kid. And there's a lot of people who are really honest and really trying hard to get their kid help. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is something very difficult. Sorry, you have to understand. I suffered through a terrible Eagles loss last night. I'm not coherent at this point. Much like the HSS program, autism claims to Medicaid in Minnesota have skyrocketed in recent years. Have you heard this story before? From $3 million in 2018 to $54 million in 2019 to $77 million in 2020 to $183 million in 2021 to $279 million in 2022 to $399 million in 2023. Wow. That makes the other program look like, nothing. This is really accelerating. And of course, we've heard a lot about the cases of autism rising. May very well be true. And there's many, many reasons. You probably have 12 of them you already believe. I won't bother going into the argument over that. But this is part of it. It's a small part of it, I think. I don't think it's the main part of the autism story. But it is a part of it, especially in this particular community, because it's exploding at rates we're not seeing anywhere else. The number of autism providers in the state spiked from 41 to 328 over the same period, with many Somali community establishing their own autism treatment centers, citing the need for culturally appropriate programming. See, the normal doctors that just actually go after the autism thing and try to help your family with it, they weren't culturally sensitive to Somali citizens. So they just needed their own. Nothing to do with fraud whatsoever. I want you to know that. Not fraudulent. By the time the fraud scheme was exposed, 1 in 16 Somali four-year-olds in the state had reportedly been diagnosed with autism, a rate more than triple the state average. Now, maybe you think there's something genetic going on here. I'm going to argue it is not genetic. I'm going to argue the opposite of that it was allegedly fraud, right? You go there. Somali citizens are opening up the autism centers. They're going to kids that are saying, hey, you're 4 years old. You sure look like you have autism. If you have autism, we're going to make a lot of money and you might make some too. And so parents are putting their kids in these programs and reaping the benefits of them at your expense. Network of fraud schemes, which form a web that has stolen billions of dollars in taxpayer money, involve many members of Minnesota's Somali community. Feeding Our Future, HSS autism services cases are far from the only examples. At least 28 fraud scandals have surfaced since Walz was elected governor in 2019. And, while Tim Walz isn't part of the Somali community, to my knowledge, maybe he was, I don't know. Well, maybe that's where maybe he likes to hang out there. I don't know. Maybe he likes Somali food quite a bit. The issue here is not necessarily that he's part of the Somali community or part of these frauds, but what he is very key to is overlooking them, because he's afraid, terrified, if you will, to bring up any of these complaints. Everybody knows this stuff is going on in the state, but nobody wants to admit it. Nobody wants to call them out because you'll be called a racist. You'll be called, culturally insensitive. And of course, these people, donate to the Walls campaign, and they're running in many of the same circles. Somali fraud rings have sent huge sums of remittances or money transfers from Minnesota to Somalia. And this is where the case gets a little bit darker, because while Tim Walz might seem like the worst person humanity has ever produced, there are actually worse people across the globe. And these fraud scandals are not only helping the people in the Somali community that are committing fraud and telling their kid they have autism when they don't. What's going on here? It's nuts. But according to reports, an estimated 40% of households in Somalia get remittances from abroad. In 2023 alone, the Somali diaspora has sent back $1.7 billion, more than the Somali government's budget for that year. Now, there's not much of a government, honestly, in Somalia, but that's pretty impressive. You're sending back more money from the United States than their entire government budget. Some of the money that has been directed to an even more troubling destination is the al-Qaeda-linked Islamic terror group Al-Shabaab. Yes, that sounds like a delicious dish. It isn't. When you go to a restaurant and you order the Al-Shabaab, bad things might happen, just so you know. According to multiple law enforcement sources, Minnesota's Somali community has sent untold millions through a network of hawalas, an informal clan-based money traders that would have wound up in the coffers of Al-Shabaab. Here's the money quote. Are you ready for it? This is what, it's not me saying this. This is what they're saying as they look at the entire scope of this scandal. Federal counterterrorism sources confirm that millions of dollars in stolen funds have been sent back to Somalia, where they ultimately land in the hands of Al-Shabaab. As one confidential source put it, the largest funder of Al-Shabaab is the Minnesota taxpayer. Just want to thank Tim Walz. I just want to think about what I just said. A branch of Al-Qaeda in Somalia is operating with the money coming from you, if you live in Minnesota, as a taxpayer. And given the choice of any human being on the planet to become vice president of the United States, Kamala Harris chose the head of that state. You can't make it up. Honestly, it is absolutely incredible. By the way, you might think the police were like, gosh, we're going to come down on these guys. We're going to make sure they know if anyone in the Somali community is doing this, you're in big trouble. You'd think you'd get that speech from the police. This is the speech we actually got. Watch.
The Somali community here in Minneapolis has been welcoming and has shown love towards me, and I appreciate it. Over the last 3 years, we have been working together to try and address some of the real serious problems that we have in our community. We have to be honest at times with the problems that we're having in our community, and we need our community to help us fix those problems together because it's real and it's serious. At the same time, if people have taken anything that I have said out of context in a way that's caused harm, I apologize and I'm sorry for that because that's not my intention at all.
I'm sure it's not. By the way, we had to cut out the Somali translator that was associated with all of those comments. Look, it's tough to be a cop. It's tough to be in that situation. I'm sure, bringing these things up is not easy. I don't think you need to apologize for enforcing the law, though. And not quite what he was doing, but it was bordering on it. It was a little closer than I wanted him to be. Look, the bottom line is there's massive fraud going on in these communities. Trump has called it out. A lot of people have called it out. Christopher Rufo as well. It needs to be taken care of. And if you think about how bad this is for people who really need these benefits, right? These are all going to be put under the microscope. And again, it's kind of hard to prove, right? Like you're trying to say, oh, my kid has these problems. We shouldn't be stealing money from kids who actually have the problems and giving them to terrorist groups. I mean, do I have to even make these arguments? Do I have to say these sentences? And yet Tim Walz is going to stand there and make sure that culturally inappropriate things don't happen to his voters, which are largely in communities like the Somali community. So there's a lot of controversy there and a lot to follow, lots of threads to pull on there. Chris Rufo's doing that. Again, the show is Rufo and Lomez. It's right here on Blaze TV, part of your Blaze TV subscription. I would encourage you to go to StuDoesAmerica.com, StuDoesAmerica.com. There you can get access to the entire network if you sign up through that link, StuDoesAmerica.com. Save, I think, $20 when you do so, and you get access to lots of great shows, of course, including the new one from Rufo and Lomez.